Arthur Koestler's Darkness at Noon, originally published in 1940, is one of the most important political novels of the 20th century. Set against the backdrop of the Soviet Union's Great Purge in the late 1930s, the novel explores themes of ideology, revolution, totalitarianism, and individual conscience through the psychological and moral torment of its protagonist, Nicholas Rubashov, a veteran of the Bolshevik Revolution who is arrested, imprisoned, and ultimately tried for crimes against the state he helped create. Koestler, a former communist himself, offers an incisive critique of totalitarian logic and the self-destructive nature of revolutionary idealism. Historical context. Koestler wrote Darkness at Noon during his exile in France and later in England, inspired by the Moscow show trials held between 1936 and 1938 under Stalin's regime. These trials targeted old Bolsheviks, accusing them of counter-revolutionary activity, sabotage, and treason. Despite the absurdity of the charges, many confessed and were executed. Koestler sought to understand why seemingly rational, loyal revolutionaries would confess to crimes they did not commit. His novel is both a political allegory and a psychological study of this phenomenon. Plot overview. The novel opens with Rubashov's arrest by the secret police. Once a powerful figure in the Communist Party and an international emissary of the revolution, Rubashov has now fallen out of favor. He is accused of plotting against the state and engaging in anti-party activities. The story unfolds largely within his prison cell, interspersed with flashbacks to his political career, interrogations by his former comrades, and internal dialogues as he contemplates the nature of truth, justice, and his own complicity in the regime's crimes. Rubashov's main interrogators are Ivanov, an old friend and fellow revolutionary who still believes in the party's cause, and Gletkin, a younger, robotic enforcer who represents the new, ruthless generation of ideologues. Through these interrogations, Koestler dramatizes the conflict between old and new guard communists and the moral compromises made in the name of historical necessity. Ultimately, Rubashov confesses to the charges, not because he believes he is guilty, but because he believes his execution will serve the party's future. He accepts the logic that individuals must be sacrificed for the good of the collective, and that the revolution is always right, even when it destroys its own children. Themes. 1. Totalitarianism and the death of the individual. At the core of Darkness at Noon is an exploration of totalitarianism's annihilation of individual conscience and autonomy. The party demands absolute loyalty and believes that history follows deterministic laws that justify any means for achieving the ends. Rubashov, once a believer in this vision, begins to question its moral and philosophical foundations. The regime does not tolerate dissent or deviation, and individuals are expendable for the sake of ideological purity. Rubashov's confessions are not born from guilt, but from submission to this oppressive logic. He is aware that his execution will likely be used as propaganda to reinforce the party's absolute authority. Koestler shows how ideological systems, when absolutized, lead to moral blindness and dehumanization. Revolution and betrayal. Rubashov's journey is emblematic of the revolutionary who becomes the victim of his own revolution. Koestler, drawing on his own disillusionment with communism, shows how revolutions often devour their own creators. Rubashov once denounced others for the same kinds of ideological infractions he is now accused of. He justified those purges as necessary for the movement. Now he faces the same fate and must confront his earlier choices. This cyclical betrayal reflects the tragic arc of many real-life revolutionaries during Stalin's reign, including Bukharin, Zinoviev, and others who were executed despite lifelong service to the communist cause. 3. Ideology versus conscience. One of the novel's most powerful intellectual conflicts lies in Rubashov's internal struggle between ideological determinism and personal morality. The party teaches that morality is subordinate to history and that truth is what serves the revolution. Rubashov starts to question this, wondering whether the means really justify the ends, and whether sacrificing human lives can be justified by abstract historical goals. The novel's title, Darkness at Noon, is metaphorical. It represents the eclipse of enlightenment, reason, and individual morality in the face of ideological tyranny. Despite being imprisoned at midday, a time symbolic of clarity, Rubashov is enveloped in darkness, both literal and moral. Language and doublethink. Koestler anticipates George Orwell's concerns with language and thought control in 1984. The interrogations show how language can be twisted to mean its opposite. Rubashov is forced to confess not only to crimes he did not commit, but to meanings he does not accept. Gletkin's mechanical style of interrogation reveals how ideological regimes reduce communication to slogans, stripping words of their ethical substance. Rubashov recalls former associates like a German communist and Little Lowy, a Belgian dock worker, both of whom he betrayed in the name of revolutionary logic. Their tragic fates haunt him, pushing him toward a crisis of conscience. Characters. Nicholas Rubashov, the protagonist, a former high-ranking revolutionary intellectual who becomes disillusioned with the party's methods. His psychological and ideological breakdown is the centerpiece of the novel. Ivanov, a cultured, pragmatic interrogator and former comrade who tries to appeal to Rubashov's loyalty and rationality. Gletkin, a younger, ruthless party operative who believes that torture, fear, and rigid discipline are justified for preserving order. He embodies the inhuman face of modern totalitarianism. Figures from Rubashov's past, both victims of his decisions, who represent the moral cost of ideological absolutism. Symbolism and imagery. Koestler employs stark imagery throughout the novel. The cell's silence, the tapping of prisoners on the walls in Morse code, the regular footsteps of the guard, the toothless peasant in the neighboring cell. These images evoke the claustrophobia and dehumanization of totalitarian imprisonment. The recurring dream of being led to execution haunts Rubashov's mind, symbolizing his foreknowledge of inevitable doom. The symbol of the diary Rubashov keeps hidden, unread, private, contrasts with the public confessions extracted under duress. It represents the individual voice trying to survive under the weight of history and propaganda. Tashed at philosophical underpinnings. Koestler was deeply influenced by Hegelian and Marxist dialectics, but also by existentialism and Christian ethics. Rubashov's moral awakening is a rejection of the party's dialectical logic that sacrifices the individual to historical destiny. Koestler critiques the secular religion of totalitarian politics, suggesting that without a transcendent moral compass, human life becomes expendable. The novel also touches on determinism versus free will. Rubashov comes to believe that despite the party's claims, history is not inevitable, and individuals must assume responsibility for their actions. This recognition leads him to embrace a kind of martyrdom, even as he knows it is futile. Legacy and impact. Darkness at Noon was widely acclaimed and influential, especially among Western intellectuals. It played a key role in shifting leftist opinion away from Soviet communism during and after World War II. Alongside Orwell's Animal Farm and 1984, it forms part of a powerful trilogy of anti-totalitarian literature. In recent years, the original German manuscript, long thought lost, was rediscovered and confirmed that Koestler's English version was not a direct translation, but a new composition. Nevertheless, the novel's clarity, force, and dramatic power remain undiminished. Darkness at Noon is a haunting exploration of the collision between ideology and morality, loyalty and betrayal, and freedom and tyranny. Through the tragic figure of Rubashov, Arthur Koestler exposes the psychological mechanisms and moral compromises that allow totalitarian systems to flourish. The novel's power lies not only in its historical relevance, but in its timeless meditation on the human condition, the cost of dogma, and the fragility of truth in the face of absolute power.